Saturday Night Fever is arguably the most famous title in the dance movie subgenre, but it's a very different breed to the feel-good movies of the 1980s. John Travolta stars in what turns out to be a more grounded 70s drama than the Bee Gees soundtrack would suggest. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
My girlfriend, she likes the taste of communion wafers.
It's a very specific quote, but
It is.
Yep.
It's one of the few that didn't have profanity just laced throughout.
Yep. We'll talk about that. This is a movie podcast, everyone. We do seasons of movies, we do franchises, we do filmographies, that kind of thing. The current season, which is coming to an end with this episode, is dance movie season. Thankfully,
The most successful season we've ever had.
that is factually incorrect. Okay? The big bus and its continued success says otherwise, okay?
That's got to be our just goose hanging around our neck for the rest of the show, is why did the big bus do so damn well?
We'll never top the big bus. But we're doing dance movie season. This is the final episode of that season, and it is a big movie. It's maybe the most famous movie associated with dancing, and that is Saturday Night Fever. So we'll start spoiler free, of course, as we always do. We'll give you a warning before we do go into the spoilers. And of course, before we start, I'll just remind you, if you're enjoying the show, please do hit the like button. Helps us out a bunch if you do. And of course, you can get some bonus shows that me and David do over on Patreon, but I'll tell you more about all that at the end of the show. So, Saturday Night Fever, I actually saw for the first time just a couple of years ago. I bought it when it was on sale on iTunes, and I think I watched it on a stream of all things. But that was about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago at a push, but no more longer than that. So it's not been that long, relatively speaking, since I saw this for the first time. And other than Bring It On, maybe... Oh no, and Footloose, but those are the only ones I think I'd seen before we did them for this season. Everything else was kind of a first time sort of jaunt, but
I mean, out of everything, I have not seen any of them before. I've been first times the whole way through here. So
yeah, well, I'm curious as to your expectations going into this, because I think this movie is probably a bit darker than you probably think. Because I think you going into this, you probably think, oh, it's going to be a disco dancing competition movie, and there's famous songs from the Bee Gees in it, and there's dancing, and there's a kind of a dark coming of age story that's actually more kind of, there's like you said, there's a lot of profanity, there's a lot of racial slurs, a lot of homophobic slurs, there's a lot of just straight up sexism and things like that. It's got a lot more of an edge to it than I think most people realize going into it.
Yeah, I think it's the same sort of scenario that not for audience at the time, obviously, but that I think people looking back on like the original Rocky, if they aren't familiar with it, like most people go in thinking like, oh yeah, Rocky goes in, he wins the fight. Like it's all just one big training montage. And then you sit and watch it and it's like, no, this is about the struggles of like a working class guy trying to make it. And there's a lot of similarities to that in here. But it is a lot darker than I thought it was going to be going in. It took, I don't know, probably like 3 or 4 scenes before I realized that it was going to be a lot darker. But once it hit, like it just kept on coming with the just layers upon layers of it gets worse each time.
Yeah, what's so funny for me is that long before I saw this movie, I had seen the opening sequence parodied. As I assume a lot of people have, but specifically, there's one parody in mind that I have, and that is the opening of the movie Bushwhacked. For anyone who grew up in the 90s, you might remember a film starring Daniel Stern, that's right, Marv from Home Alone, as a kind of basically sleazeball criminal who ends up on the run, framed for a crime he didn't commit. And as a cover, he ends up pretending to be like a scout leader for a bunch of like kids. So it's like a kids like sort of comedy action kind of movie. I remember it being entertaining when I was like 7. I don't know if it actually holds up in any way, but the opening sequence of that movie is recreating the opening of this movie, which is him walking down the street. He's got a leather jacket on, Staying Alive is playing, but there's like some little quirky differences. For example, in this movie, John Travolta goes and gets like a slice of pizza, or actually 2 slices of pizza. He eats 2 slices at the same time like a madman, right?
Yeah.
in in Bushwhack, I vividly remember him getting like a giant like cup of either soda or milkshake, and like two huge like snowball like, cake things, and like stuffing them into his mouth as he's walking down the street, but Staying Alive's playing. And the jokes being that he's not actually cool, he just thinks he's cool.
Yeah, he's the inflated ego. All right, yeah, I get it.
Anyway, so that's why I have got it in my head. The first time I watched Saturday Night Fever, I'm thinking Daniel Stern and Bushwhacked.
That's fair. Unfortunately for me, I mean, I'm sure I've seen it parodied elsewhere, but the most recent time was that the Capital One credit card. I don't know if this aired over on your side, but
I doubt it.
In front of all of the movies that I had to see during the Christmas season for our collective shows, they just had this ad running, which was John Travolta as Santa Claus just redoing everything, the entire sequence, wholesale.
That's a bit sad, isn't it?
It's called Holiday Night Fever, and I hated it.
I have no problem with an actor making a extra bit of cash by doing an ad, but I think it's a little bit sadder when he's not in any real movies anymore, and that's all he's doing. It feels a little bit more desperate, a little bit more sad. But whatever. Yeah.
He's just waiting for his second Pulp Fiction to come about, bring him out of obscurity again.
Well, the Fred Durst directed movie was in, which is luckily for you, because it's absolutely extra reels material. It just so happens that we already did it on a Screams bonus episode, so you don't have to worry about it.
Darn it.
But it's a movie where he plays someone with mental disabilities.
No.
Directed by Fred Durst.
Oh God.
Yeah, actually, I'm trying to remember the name of it. I could probably just click on John Travolta and find out. But
I don't know. I feel like that's going to be buried pretty deep.
No, it's relatively recent. Like, it's in the last few years-ish. He was in a movie called Die Hard, like, just last year. Oh, God, how the mighty have fallen. Die Hard.
Is that just a... Yeah, that's just a Kevin Hart movie.
Is it? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
That's all it is. It's Kevin Hart starring as Kevin Hart.
Wait a minute. There it is. The Fanatic. That's what it was.
Oh, I remember that one coming out.
Yeah.
I remember seeing stuff about that online and how it was not good.
It's something. It's something else. You're lucky. You're lucky that me and Tim already did it.
I will take that luck to Vegas with how lucky I feel right now.
So, yeah, Saturday Night Fever is John Travolta as a young man, partly 19, which I don't believe he really is. But that said, though, people did look older back in these days for the same age.
Right.
So I do believe. But it's funny, though, because the love interest, when he meets her, says she's 20. And I'm like, are you? You feel like you're like pushing 30, if I'm honest. But, you know, whatever. We'll roll with it.
Yeah, Travolta was 24 at the time of release. I don't know about filming, but at the time of release, he was 24. So it wasn't that far off, but you're right in that because people just look older from back then, he felt like he was in his 30s, just looking at him.
Everyone just feels like they wanted to grow up so fast. Maybe it's because, you know, all people could do for fun back then was go out drinking. so they just became alcoholics, and that's just what they were like.
There was a scene in this movie where they were talking about, okay, so we don't have enough money to go to the club again, so we can go catch a movie. And that was it. That was all the options they had.
Yes.
They live in New York, and that's it.
Yeah. Specifically Brooklyn, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Because they're not in Manhattan. That's kind of a big part of the movie, is that they're kind of on the lesser district, you know? So... Yeah, he really loves dancing, but it's very much this coming of age thing where he is a young guy who only cares about getting laid, who only cares about going to the club at the weekend. That's all. The opening scenes kind of really get this idea across that he gets his paycheck and he wants to spend it over the weekend, and that's it. And that's like he has no idea of what his future is. He doesn't care about the future. And the movie story is really going to be about that and that changing over the course of the film.
Right.
But I'll leave it there for that. Obviously, there's a lot of dancing scenes in the disco and stuff like that. But we'll get to it. Anyway, David, what did you think of Saturday Night Fever?
I mean, I definitely liked it. It's one of those things where I went in with such different expectation that once it hit me upside the head with the actual, like, what it was doing, how gritty and like realistic it was trying to play this story, and not just, oh, look at the funny man in the white suit dancing under disco lights. Like, I had to sit with it with a while and just try to figure out what exactly like I was getting from the movie. And I think by the time it wrapped up, I get why it is so critically regarded. I understand that it isn't just, you know, a standard dance movie. Going back to, I think Flashdance is the one that we really said had the most of like, yeah, the dancing's there. The dancing is like the dream of the character, whatnot, but the story is definitely much more built around the struggles that they're going through. This is writing the book on that.
Oh
This
yes,
is 100% the trials and tribulations that a young man in late 70s New York is going to be able to go through in a dead end job and everything else like that.
yeah. I mean, this is absolutely a drama, a 70s gritty drama first, and it just
Mm-hmm.
happens to be the character's passion happens to be dancing. Like that. That's just what it is. Um, Even more so because I mean I know he brought up Rocky, and funnily enough, he has a Rocky poster in his room in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, But Rocky, well, I do think it would be kind of true to say, oh, that's a drama about who he is, and then boxing's just it happens to be what I think. Maybe it's clouded with the fact that ended up with a lot of sequels where the boxing very much took center stage. Where it's no, it is the
Yeah.
boxing franchise at a certain
Mm-hmm.
point, but the first film's more this just sort of like kind of heartfelt drama about this guy who's kind of struggling and whatever. In fact, it's
Mm-hmm.
not going to be that long till we're talking about Rocky movies, so
Spoilers. We're not out of the spoiler section, Pete.
look forward to that soon, everyone. But I think this movie is surprisingly dark at times, to the point where it really pushes you to the edge of being able to empathize with the lead
Mm-hmm.
character. Obviously, there is some growth by the end because it is a character drama and there is an arc, there is stuff there, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not shielding you from anything. And I think what really caught me off guard early on was how just quick and fast they were throwing out slurs left and right.
Yeah.
And I get that for the time period that was probably a very realistic portrayal of these type of like sort of low income characters who are living like this. This is probably a fairly accurate representation. I feel like these
Mm-hmm.
days, if a movie wanted to be about this subject, they would still use one for dramatic effect at some point, but it would be more subdued until then. It'd be like a one big punctuation of like, oh, he finally said the bad word or something.
Right.
Here, they're just casually like throwing things around, particularly when you get to a scene early on where he meets up with his friends, and the way they talk to each other about other people is just
Mm-hmm.
horrific by any modern standards.
Yeah, but it also doesn't feel like it's just throwing it in for the sake of shock value or anything. It feels like this is how a group of like kids their age would talk back then. This feels like the sort of thing where, okay, they have no parental supervision. I mean, the first thing they do when they get in the car together is they list off all of the drugs and like alcohol they have before they go to the disco. So like, yeah, there is this idea that they are irresponsible. They don't have this like greater empathetic response to them. They're just a bunch of kids who just go nuts out on the town.
Yeah, and part of the arc of the movie is Travolta's character Tony kind of like maybe coming to realize some of these things.
Mm-hmm.
That said, though, it's not like a super handheld drama. Like there's like a big speech towards the end, a realization, or it's a little bit more subdued than that, where you're kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, there's an improvement, but it's like he's not just instantly a perfect person by the end. Like there's still growth to happen. There's still things to change. It's more just
Right.
the idea that by the end, maybe he's realized he needs to move on from where he is in the world, and that's a big part of this as well. I mean, literally in terms of space, like getting out of Brooklyn, but more
Mm-hmm.
so the type of people he surrounds himself with, the type of activities that he cares about. This idea, like there's a kind of another running thing in the movie about like one or two characters being like, hey, why don't you try and do something more serious with the dancing? Why don't you make that something that you can actually build upon as opposed to just being happy that you're the big fish in the small pond at the local
Mm-hmm.
club at the weekend kind of thing. And that kind
Right.
of comes up as well. So, no, I mean, I think it's a strong character drama.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those movies where there's a lot more going on in it than I think the reputation it has lends itself to, which
Mm-hmm.
is both good and bad. But it is definitely dark, and there's definitely some things towards that. Like I think there is definitely some trigger warnings you probably have to give someone
Oh,
before they watch
absolutely.
this, and
Yeah.
a variety of them as well, not just like one type of trigger warning. There's a few
Mm-hmm.
different things that you probably have to warn people of. So I
Yeah, no, I
guess
mean that's the what is it, the Netflix bar up at the top whenever they
yeah.
show the thing. It's gonna take the whole length of the screen, man, to go through everything.
Yeah. So definitely worth. I mean, how much I like it though is kind of an interesting question. I think it's a solid, well-made movie. Like I think the direction's good. I think the performances by and large are very good. It's I don't know, like now that I've seen it twice, especially, I don't know if I came out of it thinking it's as good as some other dramas that I really like. Like I think maybe part of it is so specific that it's hard to completely connect with it like I do some other ones. Or maybe it is just that he is just unlikable enough in a lot of ways that it's hard to ever be completely behind the character, even though there is that positive change by the end.
Mm-hmm. I do think that this is also a bit of a time capsule sort of thing. I think that people who grew up in this period, or possibly even if they have nothing to do with disco, if they grew up just in this period of New York or any sort of big city like that, like you said, there's a lot of like racial and ethnic stuff that's going on here. And there's a lot of the idea that if you're stuck in the working class, then you are stuck in the working class. It's like impossible to get your way out. I think that that's the sort of stuff that a lot of people could relate to at the time. But as we have changed in society-wise and stuff like that, a lot of the racial and ethnic stuff kind of falls by the wayside. And there's a lot more chances for being able to like move out of the city and get a job elsewhere and sort of stuff like that.
Yeah, although I think I'd fight you on one little bit of phrasing there. You said stuck in the working class. I think the point of this movie is that he's not stuck. The point of this movie is that he just doesn't aspire to get out of it. You know, it's more about him wanting to, like, he might fail, and that's another thing entirely, but it's more just that he's not even got the drive or the ambition to even try to take himself to anywhere else or do anything else.
I guess it was more so viewing his family as a whole. Because obviously his father worked construction and now he's unemployed and whatnot. And it's this idea that like they're doing everything quote unquote right. They, as far as like doing the jobs and whatnot, but they're still stuck in this sort of like scrimping and scrounging, trying to get whatever they can just to feed themselves sort of thing.
Yeah. So obviously there's a lot of dance sequences, mostly in the disco. I mean, there's some stuff in the practice kind of like rooms where he goes to rehearse, but for the most part, it's in the dance floor disco. And there's probably really there's three kind of key sequences, right? There's one early on to establish how good he is. There's one in the middle, which is kind of like him in front of his brother who's visiting, and that we'll get into kind of that character in spoilers. And then there's the actual sort of competition night sort of towards the end of the movie. Although it's not the finale. There's actually a good 20 minutes after the competition, which is...
The competition scene is really just like the flip. It's that where we are transitioning into all the big third act stuff. Yeah.
And that's probably where most of the darker stuff in the movie is as well. So, we'll get into all that. But... yeah, interesting. Obviously, there's like multiple Bee Gees songs in this. There's 4 or 5 of them, and most of them play multiple times as well. That stuck out to me.
To the point where I think it's More Than a Woman is actually, I heard, being adapted into the score itself, as he explores his romantic subplot. Like it's not just a jukebox musical in terms of they play the songs and nothing else. Like they adapted it into the actual score of the movie.
Yeah, that's very much the romance theme. Staying Alive is very much he's a cool guy theme, and then like the other ones sort of come on in the disco a couple times. I don't even know if they do the Disco Inferno song. Is that Bee Gees?
No, they don't. That's not Bee Gees, but like it is in the movie 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, it's multiple times.
There's other disco songs. I think one point they show like a dance class or something, and they're playing Disco Duck, which that's a choice. But yeah, no, definitely not Bee Gees the whole way through.
Yeah, Bee Gees are fine. Like I would never choose to put on this type of music, but it's not torture to listen to by any means. So it's kind of in the middle ground for me as far as like music goes.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a reason that the soundtrack to this movie is just its own independent thing. Like, it is the quintessential disco soundtrack.
Yeah. Oh yeah, every song I think about, if you said 70s disco, like they're all songs that are from this movie. Now, I do wonder, like, were any of these Bee Gees songs, or like, did they all exist before? It's just, I assume maybe one of them was written for the movie, but I mean, I assume not all of them were.
Staying Alive was for the movie.
Okay.
How Deep Is Your Love? It was released as a single separately, but then also included in the movie. So yeah, it looks like Some of them were not. What about More Than a Woman? That's obviously the big one. That is for the film as well. So
Really,
it
these
seems
are
like
all.
most of them are for the film.
I assume they're all on a Bee Gees album as well, though, right?
Yeah, they were released separately as well because obviously they had a lot more songs they put out that were not part of the movie. But yeah, that was most of them were just featured in this one.
Well, they
This
already
movie had. Go ahead.
were they already a big like successful group, or did this movie make them a big successful group?
Oh, I mean that's much harder to quantify. Let me see if I
I
can.
don't know. I'm just curious.
Yeah, let me see if I can get anything there. Bee Gees, they formed in 1958, and then they rose to prominence in the mid to late 70s. So, I mean, they were around, but it looks like their main big thing may have been they had a live album that was somewhat successful, and then Saturday Night Fever just really sent them up to the top.
Okay. Man, imagine waiting 20 years for their big break where, oh, now we're superstars. That's,
Yeah, wow.
yeah, we have John Travolta in his white suit to thank for it.
I just got to keep this high falsetto voice for the rest of my career. Cool.
I mean, it's probably easier than all the screaming that some metal bands do.
True.
When they get older. Like, oh, you've shredded your vocal cords. Oh, no.
What do you mean Metallica doesn't sound as good as they used to? I wouldn't imagine.
Oh, dear. I didn't think it was funny the first time I watched it. It's because obviously, you know, the whole, like, pose with the one hand in the air and the other hand down in that particular dance move is that he doesn't actually do that while he's wearing the white suit in the movie, even though he's posing in that suit, in that pose in the poster.
Yeah, that is definitely a promotional shot. That scene does not happen in this movie, period.
Yeah.
Like, the girl he's with never wears that dress with him,
No.
and he never does that pose. That was all promotional.
Well, he kind of does that move in an earlier dance scene, but it's not in that suit.
Yeah, but it's like it's the same sort of thing of oh god, what were we talking about? I can't remember. One of the movies we did somewhat recently, we were amazed that they just threw out like the biggest line, and it was super just like, oh, that means nothing in the context of the movie.
It was Dirty Dancing. It was Baby in the Corner.
I thought there was a later one, but yeah, I know we did it for Dirty Dancing. But yeah, no, it's that same sort of thing where sure he does the pose, but it doesn't matter in the movie. It's never a big moment. Like, it's just one of his many dance moves.
Yeah. I will say, on the filming of the dancing, they do a couple of interesting things with it where there'll be like a lot of low angles looking up at him as he's doing his moves, and it kind of gives this impression that he's almost like gliding around, and it does actually add to, like, and the way we kind of, it's the opposite of Breaking, where we said the camera work actually hurt the dancing and made it look worse than it actually was. This actually, I wouldn't necessarily say makes it look better, because people who are into dancing might argue with that, but I will say it did give it a kind of a quality on film that did feel kind of like different. Like, it felt like he was gliding at times, and I think that did add something to the majesty. It made him feel like he was moving with such grace.
Yeah, I will say, in terms of the actual like dancing itself, it's not aging well. Like, that's the thing, is that this, I get that what they were doing is impressive at the time, and that's fine, but all I can see as I watch like this line of people all doing simultaneous dance moves is my like drunk family at a wedding, you know? Where it's like, yeah, we're all doing the line dance, guys. Isn't that great?
I think John Travolta's always been like thought of as this great dancer. I don't think he's thought of as a great dancer because he's doing like super fancy moves. I think it's just that he's really good at looking cool while he's doing simple things.
Oh yeah.
Right? And that's what this is. It's about looking cool. This isn't meant to be like the main character from Flashdance who's moving her hips at speeds that only like the Flash could dream of doing in a regular day.
No, that's honestly, by the time, and without spoiling anything of what happens, we hit the final like dance off scene, and they show the dance between John Travolta and his partner, and I'm just like, I'm not impressed. Like, it's don't get me wrong, they play it off as like everyone's like, yeah, cool, awesome, but like I'm like, okay, if that's really what you wanted to bring to the tournament, sure, why not?
Yeah. But you know, it seemed worth mentioning that. The disco they go to is called 2001: A Space Odyssey, which, I mean,
I think it's just 2001 Odyssey, isn't it? I don't think it's space in there, because that's definitely copyrighted.
I don't know. Maybe they didn't say space. Maybe I just inserted that in my brain naturally because I'm used to that title. Either way, though, interesting reference to something else. So I'll give them that. So, yeah. So yeah, there's a decent supporting cast that all kind of feed into like, the main character's story, and they all represent like different things in his life. So I think it's a really tightly written film in that respect. So yeah, I think it's a solid movie. It's a solid movie that I wouldn't say. You know, after watching it twice now, I don't know if I'll ever feel compelled to watch it again. I think I don't know if it's left like a lasting, you know, impact on me where I feel like I want to rediscover the feelings I had in the future or anything like that. But
right,
you know, I certainly wouldn't say anything really negative about how it's constructed, and I certainly wouldn't you know, badmouth it. I mean, I do think there's some dark things in it that you know, is worth warning people about. There are some sexual assault stuff at a certain point. I won't go into anything else for spoilers' sake, but I will just say there is an element of that. So
yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that I don't really have the only thing that I would want to go back for is because I am genuinely interested in Tony as a character. I think that he is very well written and he has a lot of like hidden drives and stuff that, like you said, it doesn't hold your hand through the movie. It doesn't tell you Tony's feeling this because his family does this or whatever. It's very much layers upon layers with his character. And I'm curious to go back at some point and just kind of watch how he reacts to certain things. Some of them are a bit more forward than not, but there's certain things that he does regarding, say, like a character like Annette, who we will talk about later, that are very clearly deeply layered with a bunch of feelings, not only towards her, but towards his like idea of Brooklyn and how he feels about dancing and stuff like that. And it's just a complex character that I would love to see somebody really dive into the workings of.
Yeah, he's a good character in the sense that he like part of the character's whole thing is that he's kind of a simpleton, right? He's a simpleton who's accepted a simple life, only cares about really kind of shallow things, at least in the onset, that's what it appears to be. And he's a bit of an idiot, right? He says dumb things. He gets out of his depth really quickly the second someone starts talking about a subject he doesn't know anything about, which is a lot of them.
Yeah.
It, you know, it presents this type of character, but like you say, there are kind of layers to it where you can kind of examine the influence that his mother or his father or his brother or his friends or the people around, like anyone around him, how he treats people. There's definitely an interesting idea that even the love interest, Stephanie, like I feel like the way she treats him, which isn't always nice either, feels like it's kind of influenced by a character we barely meet, but there's just enough of a little inkling that, oh, maybe she's treated a certain way by someone else, and that's kind of been passed down through her onto him. And it's a really good film in that sense, where you get to like really study the human characters and like why they're doing why they are the way they are. And I mean that in the most negative way, in a good way, but in like why all their negatives are there. Like, why do they have these negatives? Why are they dicks to each other? Why are they saying these horrible things? Why are they lashing out and having tempers at these moments? So yeah, in that sense, it's a really fascinating written movie to dissect. So I'll say that at the very least.
But yeah, no, I mean, in terms of like dance scenes or like the plot as a whole, like you said, if you look at it from the most basic level, it is technically a movie about a dance tournament, but it's the character stuff that's the real driving force. And that's, I think, the thing that if you're going to come back to it, it's going to be for that only.
Oh yeah, it's a real movie is what you're trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, not to say that you can't have like a, oh, I want to win the big contest and be a real movie. But yeah, no, it's much more in the vein of, this wasn't your Footloose. This wasn't your Breakin'. This is something a lot more story-driven than that.
Yes, and character-driven, I would say. So, yeah. All right, anything else you want to talk about before we dive in?
Did you know there's a sequel?
I did, Staying Alive. I'm familiar with it, yes.
Yes, I saw that, and I saw how it's a very short Wikipedia article, and the only link at the bottom of see also is list of films rated 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is concerning.
Yeah, I never hear anyone talk about the sequel, so...
Yeah, directed by Sylvester Stallone. So that's a thing.
What a weird... Yeah, but he also directed... Actually, he didn't do the worst Expendables. He did do the first one, though.
Which, I mean, they're all pretty down there, so whatever.
Yeah, but like 4 and 3 are
Oh,
like
absolutely.
they're
I watched through our review of 4 again just so I could
oh
remember, like, was it that bad? And yeah, it was.
yeah, we were pretty down on that. All right, spoilers then for Saturday Night Fever. You have been warned. And we'll get into it. There's not too much to say more than what we already have about the opening, because it's the him walking through the street and he's carrying a paint can. He grabs some pizza, and the few things to note here is that one, a few different times an attractive woman walks past him and he has to kind of turn and look at her ass, and one of them even tries to like go in front of and try and talk to her, and we get like a POV shot of her basically trying to just move past him and be like, out my face, go away, be gone.
It's such a good shorthand for his characterization. Like, he's walking to staying alive. You feel the strut in his step as they focus on like every step he takes. They have the very low angled shots looking out at him. You get the mindset that he sees himself as this invulnerable god of a man.
On the low angle shots, not only is there low angle shots looking up at him like he's a god, they do this thing where it's like a Dutch angle and it'll flip to the opposite Dutch angle like a couple times. So the way it's edited even gives it this like weird energy in time with the music. I think the best part of this though is I'm going to call it almost a twist, where when he finally gets to like the paint or the hardware store, right, where he's going because he works there, it turns out that he was getting this paint can from another hardware store because a customer wanted this color of paint, and he sort of snuck out the back to go and get it without her knowing that they were going to a different store to get it, right?
Right.
So he was walking nonchalant, grabbing pizza like he didn't have a care in the world, and he was supposed to be rushing back with this paint can so that the customer would never know. And the customer's even like, I've been waiting 30 minutes, what the hell's going on? And he sweet talks her a little bit. He's like, oh, I'll knock $1 off. And we already know that he spent $8 on the paint can, and then he's like, I'll knock $1 off, $10.99. And I'm like, wait, so all that effort, you've made $3.
That's $1977. That's like $10 today.
True. I don't know. His dad didn't sound that impressed with the raise later on, so.
I mean, I think John Travolta's character makes it very clear that he was not going to be impressed no matter what it was.
Yeah. Dad, I got a $17,000 raise, which is more than anyone in the 70s earns, unless you're like a rich man.
Not 18,000. You're not your brother.
Yes. Father Frank's Jr.
Father Frank.
Yeah. Oh dear. So yeah, we learn that he works here. We learn that he is liked by the customers. He's charming with them, and he asks for an advance on his wages because his boss pays him on a Monday, and he wants his wages before the weekend. And he's like, no.
Yeah. Also, as he was staying alive, he passed by a store that had like a $30 shirt, and he was like, I'm gonna get that shirt. And he put a deposit on it. He was like, do you do layaway? And he's like, I guess. And he gave him $5 and says, I want that shirt. I'll be back later. And he just leaves. And the guy's like, wait, what? I don't know you.
Well, I think the best line, because what he actually says is, like, here's $5, I'll be back to pick it up and like pay for the rest later. Is like, let me give you a receipt. And he's like, I'll trust you. And what the guy actually says is, no, don't trust me. Let me give you a receipt.
That's what it was.
And I love that idea that, like, again, it just shows how irresponsible he is, that he just assumes this guy will remember. He's like, no, I know I'll forget, and I don't want us to have an argument later. Get a receipt, and we just know that everything's on the up and up.
By the way, I just checked. $3 in 1977 is $15 today.
I'm laughing because he had to get paid to get his $30 shirt, and I'm laughing because like that's the most I would pay for a shirt now. So clearly, I have cheap taste in shirts.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, if $3 was $15 a day, that's a $150 shirt. He was going to put a down payment.
Have you ever paid for a $150 shirt,
dude? The shirt I'm wearing, I've owned since like mid high school. So no.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you go back and look at videos from like 8 years ago, I'm wearing this hoodie. I'm not a fashion person by any means. Nope. So no, I got a chuckle out of that. But so he's upset about this. But I mean, his boss. It's funny because I think his boss is kind of this interesting middle ground character where in this scene he's kind of here to point out how juvenile Travolta's character is, because he's like, no. Everyone else just gets paid on the Friday and then they piss it all away over the weekend and then they're poor again come Monday. I pay you on a Monday and that way you've got money throughout the week. I'm actually doing you a favor by paying you that way.
Yeah. He's definitely portrayed as much more of a father figure than his own father. It's someone who is
Yes.
looking out for his best interests and someone who's trying to help, even if it means being a hard ass in the end to him.
Yeah. But what I think is interesting about this character is that later on he kind of represents the potential trap of never leaving. Because later on, when they have the argument and he's like fired for like a minute, and then he comes back and he's like, no, like, we got angry, you're not fired. Here's your, the customers like you, and look at these other guys that work here, they're loyal to me, I'm loyal to them. Frank here's been here for 18 years, this other guy's been here since it opened, and Travolta's face just drops and he realizes, oh no.
I honestly, I think that scene is like the turning point of his character as a whole, because I think up until that moment, he's totally cool with just like knowing that he always has this as a fallback. He always has Brooklyn and being able to go back to his parents and whatnot. That's always going to be there. But then he realizes that he's, like you said, he has no inspiration. He has no drive. He's turned that ability to have a fallback into just, okay, well, I'm never going to leave. And seeing, Frank at the counter there 15 years on, he's like, oh, I got to go now.
I got to leave. I got to do things.
Yep.
And we see his home life, and his home life is just this chaotic place. Like, the mum's upset that he's late for dinner, even though he makes it clear in the next scene that he's always going to be late this day for dinner because he works till 6 p.m. So, like, he's never going to be on time. He tells her this.
Not only that, she says you're late for dinner, and they chastise him, and then they're like, anyway, dinner's not ready yet. It's like, all right.
Yeah, she she always talks about how great her other son is, who's the one who became a priest, Father Frank Jr. So that's like a talking point, and the fact she does the cross every time she mentions him. And then the dad is out of work, and I think the dad's a really strong, like, supporting character in this. He's only in a few scenes, really, but I think he's so strong. But as you can tell, a lot of who Tony is because his dad is the way he is. Because his dad is like so worried that he's being emasculated, like, because his wife just like talks back to him basically for one bit during dinner. She says one thing to him, and he's like, "Oh, this is because I've been out of work for a few months. You would never have talking back to me before then." And he starts like really getting on about it, and you can tell that it really bothers him. He's like, "Oh, for 30 years I've been the breadwinner. I've done this. Oh, I'm out of work for a few months, and this is immediate." He's clearly got issues with how he's perceived by those around him, and is taking it out on every single member of the family, including Tony, who he's hitting in the back of the head constantly during this scene.
Messing with his hair. And that goes back to what you're saying there, is this perception of how other people see him. Tony very clearly has inherited that, because everything, we go through an entire sequence of him getting dressed and doing his hair. He has this image to uphold down at the dance hall that he cannot allow to be faltered for any reason.
Oh yeah, he's in his underwear dancing as he's combing his hair for like a good couple of minutes. And then his dad comes, and I was surprised his dad didn't say something homophobic here, because I thought his dad was going to start like giving him shit for like caring about his appearance and like, oh, that's not a manly thing to be. I wouldn't surprise me if it was there and they cut it out just for like pacing or something, because it felt so obvious that you could have slotted that in here.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it comes up somewhat later. It's not obviously directly homophobic, but the father very clearly doesn't understand dancing, like why it matters to Tony at all.
For sure, yeah. So, yeah, that's kind of the introduction to the family. He's got a little sister as well, who...
It's also a grandmother who just hangs around.
Yeah. So, he goes out that night. He gets picked up by his friends. Like, the one guy has the car, right? So he's always the one driving and picks them up.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'll say the names of the guys real quick. You got Double J, you got Joey, you got Gus, and then the one who owns the car and is like the youngest of the group is Bobby C.
Yeah.
In terms of Double J and Joey, I will never be able to tell them apart.
They're interchangeable. To be honest, the three of them are interchangeable. It just so happens that one of them gets hurt and put in the hospital early on, so you never really have to worry about him again. He's just the one in the hospital. Exactly. Bobby C is the only one I think we have to refer to by name, because he has like his own little thing throughout the movie.
He's got a subplot going on.
Yeah.
He's by far the least confident out of the group. He's the youngest. He doesn't seem like he's got the same sort of style or grace that the rest of the group has. And mind you, Tony is 100% like the leader of the group. He is by far the most stylish and the most in charge and confident. But the other guys at least are in that same sort of, I guess, adolescent phase where, again, they're just raising hell as they go around town. They're drinking, they're drugging, they're doing all sorts of crazy stuff. Whereas Bobby's just kind of there and enjoying it secondhand.
Yeah, he's there to be the driver. So it almost feels like they're taking advantage of him a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
But yeah, this is where you sort of get a sense of who they are as people. And immediately they start talking about other races, we'll just say, using slurs to describe Hispanic people, describe black people, and sort of talking about it in like a sexual way where they're talking about who's better in bed and like what comes up when having sex with someone of a different race and so on.
That's another thing, is this shows exactly how much they are just all in. Like, their mindset is 100% on sex, because they come up with they have an entire coordinated thing where it's like, if you get a girl, you can bring her out to the car. You got 10 minutes, and then you got to switch out for the next guy. It's like, Jesus, guys.
I mean, 10 minutes is not a lot of time for anyone. 10 minutes. I mean, even that idea that they just like share the car as a place to have sex, and it gives this idea of like just like who they all are, that this is what they see as like what they want to do at the weekend. And there's even this like sexist view that comes up with Tony over like the next like several scenes through between interacting with Annette and then later Stephanie. But this idea that he kind of says that you're either a nice girl or you're a word beginning with C. I'll just I don't want YouTube to demonetize the video, so I'm not going to say
You're either a nice girl or a cootie queen.
Yes. But he's basically using that word to mean slut, right? That's effectively what he's using it for. But that's the word he's using. And so I think from here on, I'll just say slut instead, just because it's not a nice word, but it's more acceptable by YouTube standards.
Absolutely.
So this idea that it's like they want to do this with girls in the car, but he has a low opinion of any girls that would do that, right? Whenever like when Annette, who's this like girl who clearly is obsessed with him, comes up to him at the club and wants to dance with him, and he does dance with her, and there's clearly a little bit of a history there, but not like it feels like, oh, she's had a crush, he keeps sort of saying no, but he'll use her for as a dance partner or whatever.
Yeah, they have a history of dancing together, and then apparently it comes out later that they went on a single date, and she was unable to talk about anything but like how her sisters were married, and Tony's like, nah, I'm out, bye.
So, which, don't get me wrong, does show that she's also immature in another way, right? They all have their problems, but he, over these scenes, really sort of paints this picture that he has a very specific worldview of two types of women, and that's it. There's no one that falls into any other category whatsoever. And like him being challenged by that throughout the movie, when Stephanie has like opinions on things, or like the fact that he sort of drills this idea into Annette's one of the tragedies of the movie, is that Annette keeps coming to him, and honestly, it's like you feel really sad as the movie goes on. Like every time she shows up, it starts to feel really, really bad. Like watching him kind of reject her and how he does it, and so on.
Because it's not just rejection. It's like a level of manipulation to it as well.
For sure.
He knows that Annette is willing to do anything. And when they find out that this contest is going on, he's basically like, look, Annette, you're a good dancer. I know that you'll always be ready. Like, you're going to show up to practice. You're going to do whatever's necessary. I want to make it clear that this isn't dating or anything, but I am going to use you as a partner because I want to win the contest.
Well, I think actually, I think we're probably going to start to stick to themes here rather than going in order, because this ties in heavily to how Stephanie sees him. Stephanie says at the very end of the movie that part of the reason why she likes being around Tony is because he admires her and looks up to her and like sort of treats her like she's like more important than he is. And it feels like in a sort of, it's again slightly different but very similar, the way that he treats Annette is that, oh, she's handy to have around, she looks up to me, but he rejects her at the turns. She's not as cruel with it as he is to Annette, but there's definitely some parallels there in this idea of like just liking having that person around to admire you because it makes you feel good, but you don't actually want to commit to them. You don't actually want to make them your equal in any way, kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, obviously in any relationship, whether it's friendship, romantic, or whatever, it should be mutual. There should always be a level of respect that goes both ways, but it definitely feels like he has absolutely no respect for Annette, and over the course of the movie, you watch what little respect he might have just shatter. it's just completely gone by the time we hit the end.
Yeah, and it feels very cruel. It's one of the things that make him very unlikable and needing of a change, is how he treats this woman. Like, you know, because they dance up on the dance floor, and I liked his entrance to the club. He sort of walks through like he's the king of the place. Like, everyone sort of says hi to him, and they sort of like, I mean, I think his brother later on, when they bring his brother to like see how he is in the dance floor, his brother says, "Oh, it's like they part like the Red Sea," as he's
Yeah.
which is funny because by that point in the movie he doesn't want to be a priest anymore, and he's like quitting, which everyone feels a bit weird about. He doesn't want anyone to call him father. He doesn't want people to bring up church stuff. But he's the one that refers to it as like parting the Red Sea. I'm like, you just used an analogy from the biblical stuff here, buddy.
Look, if you spent your entire time only reading from a single book for the past like 2 decades of your life, it's going to be hard to shake the references.
Oh, that's like that meme on Twitter. Guy who's only ever seen, I remember what the movie was. I think it was Boss Baby. Maybe he's like, guy who's only ever seen Boss Baby watches a second movie. Getting a lot of Boss Baby vibes from this.
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh dear. So they dance, it goes well enough, and they go to like the bar area afterwards where she tries to come up and like talk to him. This is when they're talking about their one date, and she's like, "Why didn't you want this?" And he's like, "Hey, look, this dance competition's coming up. We've won before. The prize money's more this time. If we're going to be partners, then we're going to be partners. No funny stuff. We're not dating. We're not making it with each other." That was actually one of our little challenges of this movie, is some of the terminology is definitely very dated. And I had to sort of like get from context what some things meant. Like,
yeah, I think a lot of it was semi-obvious, but every once in a while they throw out one and I'm like, hold on, what? What are we talking about?
Yeah, it's like, obviously when he says, "Oh, you want to make it with me," I get that means sex, obviously, but then there'd be like a follow-up line that I'm like, "Oh, wait, hold on." What was that part? So yeah, there's definitely some of the era language, not just the offensive stuff, but just other like weird little phrases that don't really get used anymore.
Yeah.
But of course, when he's in the club though, he sees Stephanie dancing with someone, and he's like enamored. He's staring at her all googly-eyed, and he really wants to know like who she is, whatever.
What's her deal?
Yeah. Actually, I can't remember how he finds out she goes to the practice place. Does he just see her there when he's there with Lynette later on? He must do. I think he just does.
They walk in and he talks to Pete, the guy at the desk, and then as they turn the corner, he just sees her doing like some ballet stuff and just like, practice, right? Totally. Let's go practice.
Yeah. So they go practice. But then as soon as Annette leaves, who's there like a puppy dog, following him around, she's happy she's shown up to... Like, even when he arrives at the practice place, she's standing outside and he's like, "Oh, hey, why aren't you waiting inside?" And she's like, "Oh, I wanted to watch you walk up. I like to watch you arrive." And I'm like, Jesus, girl. Like,
yeah.
Like, even if you feel that way.
Says. Like, he opens up the door pretty much any time that Annette speaks. He's just like, Jesus Christ, Annette. God.
Have a little self-respect. Well, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's so sad. Like, at the beginning, it kind of feels like, oh, haha, let's make fun of Annette a little bit because she's just going to keep on, like, puppy dog eyes after this. But, like, as it gets more and more mean to her and she gets, like, more and more desperate for Tony, you just start to feel bad.
Yeah, because even his friends, the first few times she comes up to talks to him, they all crack jokes. They are all clearly because they're a mean bunch of assholes, quite frankly.
Oh, absolutely.
Like they're not nice people at all. But once she's left after practice, though, he goes up to Stephanie and tries to talk to her. Says, "Hey, we looked at each other at the dance floor," and she's like, "Come on, I looked at you for more than a tenth of a second, and you're like getting delusions of grandeur." That felt that some of the lines in this movie have dated. That one felt just as relevant today as it did in 1977.
Absolutely. And then I love how Tony turns around and just be like, I got a certain 4-letter word I want to call you.
He's like, "Are you this? Are you a slut? Is that what you are?"
Yeah.
But he's like, "Hey, do you want to go for coffee?" And she's like, "Just a coffee." He's like, "Just a coffee."
Well, that happens later on. That happens after the next practice. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He comes back.
He storms out this first time. He's like, "I don't even want you. Suck. I'm done with you.
I
Goodbye."
forgot. He comes back and he's like, "Hey, Pete, you said she comes in on Tuesdays?" "Yeah, Tuesdays." Like, "Okay, right. Okay, I'll go and see her." So yes, right. He comes back again and tries a second time. I am leaving some subplot stuff out. I will come back and talk about that stuff.
Yeah,
all the stuff with like the guy going to hospital and the brother. I think we'll come back to that.
They are very like that's the thing is that while it all informs Tony growing as a character, they don't really intertwine that much. They're all
No.
very separate plots.
No. So I think we'll stick with like Tony and Steph and Tony and
Yeah.
Annette as like a
The
through
main
line.
plot, pretty
Yeah.
much.
So she says, okay, let's go to coffee. And as they're walking to coffee, she starts talking about where she works. She works in some sort of like record company office or something like that. And she talks about how famous people come in, and she's actually sat down and talked to some famous people. I don't remember the order she said them in, but David Bowie gets a mention at one point.
Yeah.
She mentions
Laurence Olivier.
And he starts to feel really out of his depth, right? Where he's clearly just sort of like I started to feel like a little bit of like secondhand embarrassment, and I guess it's not that dissimilar to like feeling embarrassment for Annette when she's like longing for Tony. It's not quite as potent as that, but there's just these little moments where she'll bring up something and he clearly doesn't know about it, so he'll just make a joke about something he does know, and it'll come across as really like, oh, you're kind of a idiot, aren't you, Tony?
Oh, that reminds me of Boss Baby. Yeah.
He's like, oh, that reminds me, like around here, if you want to do this, you have to go get a cheeseburger at this place, blah blah blah. Something.
The one that got me was she starts just like listing off like 3 or 4 band names or something like that, and he just, you see his face blank, and then all of a sudden he's like, oh yeah, far out, they're cool, and she's like, oh yeah, which ones? And he's like, all right, so I don't actually know any of the ones you said, but like they sound cool. And she's like, well, why'd you say far out? And it's like, you just see him like trying to salvage this at all, trying to make it look like he's not a complete idiot, but it's just, but I do want to say Stephanie's kind of a little bit of a bitch here.
Oh no,
like
she is. Like this is why I'd compared their relationship to him and Annette, because she does grill him out here for being a simpleton, and does say, oh, you don't even think about bigger things or going anywhere, do you? You don't think about going to Manhattan, even across the bridge. You just think about staying in your own little bubble in Brooklyn, and all you care about is going to that club at the weekend. Like, she gives him, and some of it's right, but it's a very shitty way to bring it up and say it.
I think the one line that really drilled it into me was Travolta starts, he's on the back foot, and he's just like, well, oh yeah, you live in Manhattan, you think your life is so much better than mine. And she's like, it is better. It is absolutely better. It's like, it's not even a difference of opinions on how life should be lived. She sees her way of life as actually better than his Brooklyn lifestyle.
Yeah, what's so funny about it is that I didn't even, like, I thought she was like 25 or something. Like, I thought she was that's not a lot older, but it's like a good bit older relative to 19. So I was actually really surprised later on when she brought up to his friends when she's meeting them, she's telling a story where she's like 20, right? And assuming that happened recently, she's still 20. And I thought, wait, you're only a year older, but you're acting so much like you know the world better.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's that sort of thing where like there's a healthy way to encourage him to like try and grow beyond what he sees as his limitations right now. And that's kind of what his brother does for him, like in that subplot. Like, he just kind of encouraged him to, hey, take this thing you're good at and care about and make it something bigger, do more with it. Whereas she kind of belittles him a little bit here for staying in the box. Even though some of the advice is solid in its intent, it's very mean the way it comes out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But around here is where they basically come to the thing of, he says, all right, I want you to be my dance partner because I saw you dancing and you're fantastic. And she says, okay, yes, but only as friends. Like, there's not going to be any romance.
What does that sound like? What scene does that sound like all of a sudden? Which,
but then you get to the sequence, which I can't remember if it's here or when they're walking back after the first practice, but he offers to walk her home, and she's like, nah, like, we're just doing this as friends. Don't walk me home. I'm leaving. And he's insistent. He's like, no, I'm going to walk you home. And she's like, nope. And she just runs off without him. And he like is pissed. He kicks a trash can over. He storms off, and he's obviously not okay with just being friends.
Yeah, and she also turns around and says, "You should have just done it and not asked," and walks off.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I mean that was the second time it happened, but yeah.
Okay, right. Well, anyway, but of course he's just made this request and she's agreed to it. Cue the scene where he comes to the practice studio and Annette's standing there waiting, and she's standing there. She's got a smile on her face. She's happy to see him, and he's got some records in his hand, and he's like, "Oh, Annette, I need to tell you something. We're not going to be dance partners anymore. I found a new partner." And her face, like, this is painful to watch. It's painful.
honest to God, it's followed up by like, I think it's a scene is the most like poignant line from her, which is as he brushes by her, goes into the studio, she asks, "Why do you hate me so much? All I ever did was like you." And Travolta just sees that as a like desperation. He's disgusted by the fact that she is just like throwing herself at him, and it says so much about both characters simultaneously, but it's so layered that I'm not entirely sure everything that it's saying.
I mean, I think if nothing else, this movie, one of the key things about it is like learning to actually see other people as other human beings and not just like, you know, he's just basically labeled her in his mind as one thing, and that's all she is. He never stops to think about the hurt she's feeling or what she's going through. The same way that he looks at other people of different races, right? He just sees them as a grouping to be labeled until later on, where he starts to say, "Oh no, they're better dancers than we are," kind of thing. You know, we get into all that stuff later. But this scene, like, because just to stick with the Annette stuff here, because it sort of neatly follows on, is that the next time they're at the club, I think it's when he's there with the brother, even, she eventually comes up and she's been saying to him, "Look, since we're not dance partners anymore, and you said that was one of the reasons why you wanted us not to be a couple, because like, you know, it'd be like, it would take away from the focus, we'd be too distracted by being in a relationship. So how about we make it now? How about we make it together?" And I
got a reservation for the car for 10 minutes.
And he declines her, right? He basically says no, or he says, "Oh, we'll do it when I say we do it, not when you come up and decide." Like, he's keeping this like idea of control, which again kind of mimics his father with his mum, like the way that his father tries to make sure that she's under his control the entire time, that she's never doing anything of her own accord. And she basically tricks him into it almost by saying, "Oh, well, fine then. If I'm not going to make it with you, I'll make it with someone else." And she basically just name drops all of his friends. One of them will do it. And then he goes, "Oh, the hell they will." And he grabs her hand and takes her to the car. And like, he's basically just decided to do this, to have sex with this girl, because I guess his masculinity is threatened by like her just saying, "I'll do it with one of them instead." So he can't have that. He has to go do it now.
Yeah, no, I really thinking about the character, I feel like what Tony's primary issue here is that as much as he doesn't have any drive or motivation to improve himself, he also doesn't like where he's at. Like, he does have this layer of self-hatred to himself. And that's why he tries to do the escapism stuff with dance. He tries to just get out there, and people see him and they say he's the best. And it is something that like gets out of that level of self-hatred, because it is something he's genuinely good at. But then once people come up and they say that they like him, like not his dance, they like him, this thing that he hates so much, it's something that he's like, "Well, you don't know anything then. Like, clearly you're wrong about this because I'm a piece of crap." Yeah, like, that's not something you should like.
Yeah, there's a few times, both in the first and second time they're at the club, where he'll finish a scene with someone else and he'll just go back to the dance floor and start dancing, and he'll be quite happy as he's dancing with strangers, and he'll clearly be in like in a zen place almost, and it really does feel like he does, like you say, it's an escape for him. It's like, this is the one time he doesn't have to think about what the rest of his life is, and that's kind of like the outlet he has for it, which is a good bit of writing there. So this scene with Annette in the car, though, where they've kind of started, like, I'm not sure if there's quite been penetration yet, but he's on top of her, and he starts just as he's kissing her neck, he's like, "Hey, so like you're fixed, right?" Which is a really crude way to ask that, by the way.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But she's like, "What do you mean?" It's like, "Well, you're on the pill." It's like, "No, well, oh, you've got like a diaphragm or something. You got maybe one of those after things, or
yeah, you have literally anything going on down there."
And she's like, "No, it doesn't matter. I love you." And he's like, "Oh, Jesus Christ." And he just pulls away. And I think my favorite line, that's a really nasty line in the whole movie, is him going, "Just give me a blowjob." That line made me laugh in a really dark way, because I'm like, that is so like he's so selfish and so just like, "Oh, well, we're here for me, so you just take care of me, and that'll be the end of it."
That's, again, it goes back to that self-hatred thing where, like, he was willing to go in on it when it was going to be something that was just like, "Oh, I'm using you, I'm getting some pleasure out of this, but it has nothing to do with how you feel about me." But then as soon as you realize, like, "Oh no, she's doing this out of actual feelings," it's just like, "Well, no, screw that. I don't want to do it anymore."
It's also this, I genuinely felt like she was like happy with the idea that, "Oh, if he gets me pregnant, then..."
Oh yeah.
like that's him locked in. Like he can't do anything anymore.
No doubt. That was definitely something that was on the, because I mean, like the fact that she was not going to mention it at all beforehand.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, clearly that's something she had in mind.
Yeah. Obviously, there's no guarantee, but like certainly, like she's okay with that possibility, I think.
Yep.
So they get interrupted, and the other guys get in the car, and they end up driving to like the bridge, and this is a thing they do.
It's also worth noting that sequence there, where he almost hooks up with Annette, that entire time they were at the disco, he was waiting for Stephanie to show up.
Yeah, he was
hoping she was going to be there that night.
He'd suggested that, maybe they should rehearse one night at the actual club when there's people around to like for the different environment. And he's pissed when he goes to see her the next day. He is like pissed that she wasn't there, and he's like, she's like, "Why are you pissed?" And he's like, you said you'd be there." He's like, "No, I said I'd maybe be there. I didn't say I would be there." And he's really upset, and she calls him out because he's like, "Oh, I don't have the records with me because I thought you wouldn't be here." He's like, "Well, why did you come then?" And he has no good answer. He just kind of has to like make a noise like, you cut me out. I guess.
He was here basically just to verify that she like dumped him and left him. Like he wanted to feel bad for himself, pretty much.
But yeah, pretty much. And it's interesting because I think he ends up going back. Well, she makes a gesture to him by showing up at the club the next time he's there, and it's like, "Hey, I'm here. We can do this," and it feels like that kind of mends things up. There's also other stuff in here where they start to properly bond a little bit when you get a bit more of who she is, because he agrees to help her move. This is actually why he gets briefly fired, is because he asked for the afternoon off, and the boss says he can't let him have the afternoon off, but he's like, "Well, I'm just going anyway." He's like, "Well, you're fired then." Like, "Well, F you then," and he storms out. Which, and my favorite part about this from a character perspective is that he tells Stephanie, when she gets in the car and like her mattresses, because he's helping her move, and their mattresses are on top of the roof, and there's got boxes of stuff in the car. She gets in the car, and the first thing he says is, "This got me fired, by the way." And he assures her like a minute later that he doesn't care, it's no big deal, and he'll just find another job. Yeah. But he still felt the need to immediately let her know that he lost his job to help her. Like, he had to tell her that.
Just that little manipulation tactic, that little thing of like, "So what do I get as a prize now that I got fired?"
Yeah.
I see you have 2 mattresses up there. I could bring those in first.
And then he's very disappointed when they get to her new apartment in Manhattan, and there's like this older guy there who like kisses her upon arriving. And it's made kind of clear by the end of the scene that whatever her and him had is over now, and he's like moving somewhere else, but there's definitely a history. And the entire time Tony is in the background just listening to this conversation silently. And every other time in this movie where he suspects that she likes someone else or isn't interested in him, he gets angry, he notably yells or punches something. Here he's just forced to be quiet because there's an adult in the room who'll actually like maybe, react to him if he dares do anything.
Yep. He's not the biggest man there, so he has to play by the rules of society.
And he gets very quiet, and he's like, "I'll bring in the other stuff." And it's not until after they're done where he finally says, "Who was that guy? What's going on?" And she explained.
Important to note, like, yes, they have bonded by this point, but they are still just friends. Like, this is not moved to the romantic point yet. So him freaking out at her over this is completely unfounded and unbased.
Yeah, like being hurt because he's hoping something would happen is fine, but he just lashes out and says, "Oh, who is it to you? Like, is there something there?" And what's interesting is when she starts talking about like how she met him, like, okay, this is a guy at her work. And when she started at the job, because every other time she's spoken about her job until this point in the movie, she makes it sound like, oh, she's this hot shot in this fancy office and she meets all these famous people. But this time when she opens up, she's like, "Oh, when I got there, I didn't know what to do and I was scared. And this guy reached out and kind of like assured me and gave me some pointers, and he kind of looked out for me." And it kind of sounds like he was to her what she is to Tony, what Tony is to Annette, to some extent. Like there's a knock-on effect here going down the chain that I think is very interesting.
I mean, it definitely does seem like he is a bit more not as much of a dick, because like obviously he's moving on, he's able to just leave her behind,
and maybe that just comes with
any hard feelings there.
Maybe that just comes with the maturity that he's a bit older, and like he's not like, as much as you could argue he's having this weird like kind of affair with this 20-year-old that just started working at the company. He's moving on in a bit more of a responsible way. So I don't know. It's interesting, but this leads to them sitting in the park, because she actually breaks down in the car and cries because this gets kind of emotional. And he insists they sit on the bench looking at the bridge, and this is where they do kind of bond a little bit.
This sequence, I thought, was fantastic for Tony's character without actually like getting into it, because Tony just starts listing off all of this trivia about this bridge. Like he's like, oh yeah, it weighs this much pounds, it has this much road on it, there's this trivia where there was a guy buried in the cement of the bridge, and like blah blah blah. He goes on all of this trivia, and Stephanie makes the point of saying, you know everything about this bridge, huh? And he's like, yeah, I know everything about this bridge. And of course, that's the bridge that connects Manhattan and Brooklyn. That is the bridge that he has to cross.
It's symbolic. It's literally the bridge that he has to cross, to move into the next part of his life.
It's signifying he knows everything that he has to do to grow up. He just isn't willing to do it.
Not only is it the bridge that he has to cross, it's the bridge that he literally goes to and like balances on the edge for thrills. The idea that he's literally teetering on this turning point of his life where he might cross the bridge or fall off. And that's where he is in his life. So the symbolism is very thick, and this conversation just like lays it on even more.
Like, if this wasn't done well directing wise, I feel like I would be talking about the same scene as like, yes, we get it, the bridge means adulthood, for God's sakes. But they play it off very well throughout.
No, it's just the thing where the concept of it's solid, and it's just how you execute it. It's how the actors perform it, it's how the dialogue's written, and it's how it treats it. And because it's this recurring motif, it feels like a really smart thing that they've used. It is a motif. It's this, we keep returning to this bridge. We talk about moving to Manhattan as this symbolism of moving on and growing up. Now, I'm sure that's a bit unfair in a real world sense. I'm sure there's tons of people in Brooklyn who are happy that they're there and have good jobs and whatever, but
also, Jesus Christ, if you can afford to live in Manhattan anymore, then you're already grown up. Like, you don't have to worry about that.
Oh, yeah. So, but obviously it's very symbolic in the context of the movie. Because it's after this he goes back to the store and we get the whole, oh no, you can still work here. Look at these two guys that have been here for 20 plus years. You're destined to be here your whole life. He's like, oh no.
So I think it's right after this next scene. So the next scene that we come up is that he's been shaken because he sees where his life is destined to be. He goes back to the dance studio and he finds that Stephanie is dancing, just having fun with Pete, who we've established Pete is a creep, which I think is fitting for the name. But we've established that, and he apparently sleeps with all of the girls at the studio. And so
also fitting of the name, may I add.
When we see is dancing at the studio, it's he says it's like a 65% rate where he sleeps with 65% of the women. So when Tony comes in, he's like, "Oh, what? You're trying to make it 70? Get out of here!" Just
wait.
Scram.
If she's 5%, then that's not that many women coming to.
I'm just going to assume Tony's not good with math.
That's fine. And that's probably accurate, in fact. So he gets mad about that. He finds any reason to like fly off the handle and assume that something. It really shows to his immaturity that he flies off the handle that much. Right. I think at this point, I think we'll pause here on this stuff and go back and talk about some of the other things.
The final thing I need to say, because this is the moment that it just breaks for Annette, because I think it's right after this sequence, is he leaves the studio, he's in a huff or whatever.
Oh,
Annette
that's right.
flags him down, and she just reaches into her purse and pulls out a whole handful of condoms and says, "Here, look, we can do it now, right? And he just shakes his head and says, "Jesus Christ, Annette," and walks off. And she is broken. She is done.
There's a close up of her hand just dropping the condoms onto the pavement, and I'm like, okay, this is wild. And although it is interesting, just again another connection with him and his father. So he expected her to deal with the contraception, right? He was like, "Hey, you've got a thing," and he doesn't carry condoms on him at all. He expects the woman to deal with that. There's a scene earlier on in the film where Tony decides to start like helping his mom take the dishes in from the dinner table, and the dad's like, "What are you doing that for? The women do that." He expects the wife and the little sister to do that. That's not for Tony to do, and he tells him to sit down. And it's just a really interesting little thing that his dad's got this really strict idea in his head of what a man's work is and what a woman's work is, and there shouldn't be any deviation from it. And I just think it's interesting that we see that also play out with Tony throughout the different parts of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, even earlier on in the movie when they're talking about their money troubles, the mom says like, "Oh, I'm gonna go out and look for a job
Oh
because
yeah.
we need the money," and the dad is just
Oh,
shutting that down.
he is not. He is offended at the idea that his
Mhm.
wife will go and earn some money to
Yep.
help with things. And then the other thing, of course, we kind of alluded to earlier, is that when he gets the raise, which happened in the middle of the movie, which again makes his boss look like a decent guy because he's like, "Hey, it's $250 dollar an hour raise. It's not a big deal." And
Yeah.
he's like,
I mean, it did only come up though after some like guy came in, seeing him mix the paint, and he's like, "Tony, you look like you know stuff about
"That's
paint.
true. That's true."
I own a painting company. Why don't you come work for me?" And you see the boss just being like, "Ah, crap, I'm gonna lose Tony."
Yeah, because he's like, "Oh, you'll make like twice as much as you do here." He's like, "Hey, I'll give you." And Tony's like very appreciative. You can tell that
Mhm.
he's like, "Oh, a raise! I never had a raise before. This is great." He's like, "It's only
Yeah.
$250. Fine, I'll give you $4." And he's like, "Well, I was happy with $250, but yeah, I'll take $4.
Yeah.
Give me more."
He was expecting Tony to be disappointed at 250, and when he wasn't, he's just like, "All right, fine,
Actually,
$4 then."
now I'm thinking about it, it was an hour. I bet that was $4 a week raise because I feel because
Mm.
$4 an hour in 1970s money actually is a
Dude,
lot.
I would love a $4 an hour raise right now. Are you kidding me?
Exactly, it's
Yeah,
still a lot.
definitely 4 hours a week.
Yeah, he gets paid weekly. I know he's getting paid by. I mean, he probably is paid by the hour, but you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
he's just talking about the total added on at the end of the week.
He's a salaried man.
But the dad just shoots this down. He's like, and Tony quite rightly says, "Oh, I knew you'd just shit on this. I knew you'd just like, belittle this." So
Yeah,
he doesn't use the word
because
belittle.
it has nothing to do with the fact of him making more money or not. It's because at this point in the movie, he's compared to his brother, who is just can do no wrong, literally a saint.
Well,
Like,
I don't
he
even
is
think
the
it's
best.
that. I think it's the dad's like, again, his own feelings of himself. This idea that, oh, you're
That
making
too.
more money, oh la di da, and I'm unemployed, so screw you, son. That's not that impressive.
Mhm.
I think it's kind of that kind of vibe going for it.
Yeah,
Because
I mean, Tony even brings that up. He literally says, like, "Yeah, when was the last time the unemployment office gave you a raise?"
which I'm surprised that dad didn't hit him for that. But he kind
Oh
of
yeah,
he got away with it. Yeah. So the whole thing with his brother, I think his brother is an interesting sub
yes.
character as well because.
Mhm.
Every time they bring him up for the first like 20, 30 minutes of the movies, oh, your brother's a priest, and that's why he's great. And Tony doesn't seem to dislike his brother. Tony, if anything, it seems like he has a good relationship with him from the small hints we get. But he obviously just doesn't like being compared to him and doesn't think, because the mum at one point says she has to go to church that night. And he's like, wait, why you go to church? I thought you went today. He's like, yeah, that was confession. Tonight I need to go and pray. And he's like, pray for what? He's like, I need to pray for your son, for Frank Jr. to call me. And he's like, why didn't you just call him? He's like, no, a son should call his mother. He's like, okay, but you're going to go and pray to get God to make Frank call you.
It's played up for how ridiculous it is, because it's this idea. You know what this sequence honestly does more than anything else? It sets up that this family is all about expectations.
Mm-hmm.
It sets up that all of them think that there is a certain role that has to be filled, and if you don't fulfill that, then you're a failure. And obviously they think that Tony has not fulfilled his full potential, his role that he could be in.
That's the big thing with Frank Jr. though. So when he finally shows up, right, like halfway through the movie, and Tony comes in, everyone looks kind of sad, and then he goes up to his room to find that Frank's there, and he's like, "Hey, why is everyone so upset downstairs?" He's like, they're in shock. I told them that I'm leaving the church. I'm not going to be a priest anymore."
And just to like put this into context for the audience, when Tony walks in, based off the faces of the family, I thought they were going to say Frank was dead. Like they are absolutely not okay.
Frank Jr. says this himself later when he's leaving, but I thought this was a very good way of putting it. The family basically thinks that because they've got a member of the family in the church, that's like 3 points for heaven, and that because he's left the church now, they like, oh, we're all destined to go to hell now. We're all just damned because he's leaving the church. But the brother's whole thing really plays into this idea that he hates being at the church, and he's had this realization that he doesn't want to be there anymore. This isn't what he wanted for himself. This was the role that he kind of just sort of fell into, and he wants something else. And his brother, when he sees Tony dance, he's like, "You're great. You're really good. It's like you're a different person up there. You should pursue that." And he says that again when he's leaving, because he's going to go and live somewhere. And he's just leaving in a car, and he's like, "Hey, do something with your dancing. Go and be something. Go and pursue something else." And I think the key thing that stuck out to me is like, the family, the parents are always going to like try and make you into exactly what they want you to be. And if you're going to be that, then you're going to be miserable, which by the sounds of it, that's how Frank feels about being a priest, is that he was kind of maybe, I don't know if they specifically pushed him into that role, but certainly nudged them along in a general direction.
At best, they guided him. At worst, they railroaded him. But he was definitely sent in that direction.
And he's like, you know what? You're just going to be miserable. Be who you think you should be. But it should be more than just settling for whatever it is you've got right now. It should be more than that. And, you know, that's kind of the coming of age story of the movie. And I think that side of the brother's character is really good. Like, the brother, he leaves the nightclub, like, quite early. He's like, hey, this isn't really my scene, but you were great up there. Like, this is you. You should be you. But it's all very done in this kind of like, he never like condescends. He's never like the father and kind of like belittles what he's into. He's like, no, you're good at what you do, and I encourage you to pursue it. But it's not for me. I can't be here. Like, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I especially like with just how awkward he seems there. Everyone else is in like the full like polyester suits and all that. Meanwhile, he's wearing like a wool sweater and like a cotton shirt or a collared shirt, and he's just like, yeah, all right, maybe this isn't really your scene here.
And yeah, so and then the other character we have to talk about is what was his name?
Bobby
C.
Bobby. Yep.
Who during the I think he brings it up once before, but during the scene where Frank's at the club with them, he keeps saying, "Hey, Frank, Frank, can I talk to you? I got a girl pregnant, and I was wondering if you could put in a word with the Pope." so that we could get permission for an abortion. And he's like, I don't think that's going to happen.
And honestly, at this point in the movie, like, we've gotten tons of stuff with Bobby. Like, he's been around in the crew, but this is the first point where he actually like says something, where he's given some sort of backstory to his character. And it almost seems like they're playing it as a joke because of how much he just kind of stutters and says the same things over and over and over again of like, oh, do you think the Pope will bless an abortion? It's like, ha ha ha, very funny, I guess. But then it keeps coming up. Well, and he keeps on trying to talk to like Tony and the other people about this situation.
I would compare it to the Annette plotline in a way, and not in the sense that it's similar plot wise, but more this idea that it's a side character whose story is actually very sad, and he's clearly reaching out for help, and no one's giving it to him. And you can see him losing, like, himself. You can see him getting more desperate as well throughout the movie, but in a very different way to Annette, where he feels trapped. He doesn't want to be this. And he's not like it doesn't mean that he's a super sympathetic character. He still refers to the girl that he got pregnant as a C-bomb, right? He still says awful things, but he's clearly distressed. And there's a scene where he's like giving the car to Tony so Tony can go help Stephanie move, where he's begging him, hey, I need to talk to you about what's going on. And he's like, hey, I'll call you tonight. And he begs, like, hey, promise me you'll call me tonight. And Tony says, yeah, I'll call you. And then obviously he doesn't. He doesn't call him. It's like it's a forgotten thing. And it does feel, and this character does ultimately build to a tragedy where when they're on the bridge towards the end of the movie, he's up messing around and he kind of falls in. And the police afterwards even question, did he kill himself? And they don't have a good answer, but this is kind of open to suggest that he kind of did want to kill himself. Like, he was in such a bind that he felt trapped, and he reached out to Tony multiple times, and Tony just wasn't there to be the good friend that he could be for him.
Honest to God, I think that Tony says the movie-defining line here, and I didn't use it in the opening because of how just spoilerific it is. But the movie-defining line I think that he says is, there's ways of killing yourself without killing yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that if you look at like that entire subplot of like, what does he want to be? Is there his lack of drive, his lack of innovation in his own life? That's him silently just killing himself, him just giving up and saying, there's no bigger future for me. And it's only by the end that he comes out of it and says like, no, there's a better way to move forward here.
Yeah, no, it's a good line. It's a really good line. It really sums up kind of his feeling. And I think that obviously is part of one of the things that makes him realize who he's surrounded by and that he wants better for himself. I think the other thing with his friends that really does, so there's the one guy who's there in the early scenes who then disappears because he's in the hospital, and he claims that a Hispanic gang called the Barracudas attacked him, right?
Yes.
And so there's a scene early on where they're sort of like driving through the street looking for them to get like revenge, and it kind of goes away for a bit because the movie moves on, there's other things happening. But a good bit later in the movie, at least like 2/3 in, there's a scene where they're back at the Barracuda's place, and they drive the car through their front window, and they get out and fight. No, except Bobby C, he like sort of stays in the car and gets kind of scared and drives off.
Yeah,
and,
he's scared. He drives off and then comes back at the very end once everyone's already beaten and bloodied.
Yeah, and so we have this big fight scene, which honestly, it might be the one scene where I felt like the director showed his limits, just because it felt like he's not an action director, and this fight scene kind of showed that. It was like it was serviceable, just about. And
yeah,
not more.
I mean, that's something that we always say in the more action-packed movies, is a good sense of geography to a fight is key to understanding that. I had no idea where anybody was in this, to the point where I couldn't even tell what characters were which. Like, yes, we said that the other two characters are kind of interchangeable, but when Tony gets mixed up in that and I can't tell which one is John Travolta, yeah, you lost something along the way.
Yeah, it's a mix of them all having similar haircuts. It's a mix of them wearing similar clothes. And honestly, it's a mix of the fact that sometimes in this scene it's a stunt double. So it's like, is that meant to be Tony? Is it not? But they all get, bloodied and beat up. And it's actually got it's kind of a darkly funny punchline to this scene, because they go to the hospital, right, the next day or later that night or whatever, to go see the guy that's injured. And they're like, hey, we got them, we beat them up, blah, blah, blah. He's like, oh, guys, that's great. But then he just lets it slip. He's like, yeah, I'm not sure it was the Barracudas, though. And they all just sort of like freeze and like, wait, what's that? What's that? And I think this is it's a kind of a funny version of it, but it's kind of one of the moments where I think, again, Tony is like, what am I a part of? Like, what am I? Like, he's got this plot with Stephanie where he's trying to prove that he can be mature with her, but at the same time, he's hunting like a gang with his friends to get revenge for beating up, like, his buddy. Like, there's a disconnect there.
They were obviously trying, because they literally say like, oh yeah, those slurs were coming after you, and we did it Italian style. Like, obviously, it's this sort of ethnic pride sort of thing where they're like, we got to stick together. That's just how we roll. But once it comes down that like he may have done it for absolutely no reason, it's him just kind of coming to the realization of like, I could have died there. I could have died all for maybe they were the ones who beat me up. And it's this realization that he, like you said, he's not able to stay in that lifestyle for much longer. But I do want to say that I think that this is a tipping point once we get to the dance competition scene where he realizes just how stupid all of like the racial and ethnic stuff really is. Like it kind of is that inflection point where he's like, it shouldn't matter, especially if you're not able to even remember the guys who beat you up. Like, why did we even bother doing that just based off of some stupid racial thing? Like, it's not worth it.
I mean, we're basically at that point now to talk about the dance competition, because this is where she shows up as almost a surprise, and he's happy to see her. He's kind of like ready, this is them making up after he was mad that she was dancing with the other guy at the practice place. And it's like, hey, okay, we're going to compete. We're going to go and do this, and we get an extended dance sequence of them doing their dance, and
we get a couple before them,
yes,
who I think was great. They weren't fantastic. I think they were great though. And then we get a dance couple after them, which were definitely great.
Yeah.
But then watching their dance, obviously this is the pinnacle of their romance subplot. This is where they finally come to realize they have feelings for each other, and they kiss, and it's this big swell of a moment. But their dance frankly sucks. Like, it's a low energy dance in the middle of this disco showdown. And I don't know. I didn't like it.
I don't feel particularly strongly about dancing in general, so I didn't really care.
That's fair. All right. That's fine. I mean, it's important to the plot that they were supposed to be really, really good, and I just thought it wasn't there at all.
To be fair, though, part of the plot here is that they were good, but clearly not the best, and that's part of what happens here, is that this final couple that came up are an Hispanic couple who do this kind of more Latin-style dancing, and it's it's very flashy, it's very impressive, and they're watching it, and Travolta like turns to Stephanie and says they're better than us. And the big thing that happens here is that when they're announcing the winners, they announce the Latin dancing couple as like second place, and they give Travolta and her first place, and his face drops, and he's like, this is bullshit. This is like tribalism. They're giving it to us because they just don't feel comfortable giving first place to someone of a different race, and that's bullshit.
It's because this is Travolta's club. Like, the club is catering to like white people, And so having it be a different race, they're like, well, we can't have them. They're strangers here. So we got to give it to the guy who's the king of the club.
Yeah, they earned it. So he actually goes over and like hands them the trophy and the prize money and says, "Hey, this belongs to you. You earned it. That was great." And he just storms out with Stephanie. It's funny because obviously this feels like a big turning point for the character, because it feels like this is him getting over how he sees people in some ways. But it's not like we're not done with these characters like growth yet, because the very next thing that happens is the darkest thing he maybe does in the whole movie. So
well, see, that's why I think it's not really a positive. It's not so much that he is getting over and he sees like, oh yeah, racial stuff is bad. It's more so that dance has always been an escape from all of the stuff out in the real world.
Sure, yeah.
And now this is something where he's realized, no, it's here too. Like, this is something that even his dance hall is not immune to completely just making up the rules as it goes along.
He's not always easily going to just be the best. He's eventually going to be challenged. And that's something that comes into a lot of other dance stories when they're talking about, like, you know, leveling up and getting success and auditioning and things like that, where as good as you might be, or maybe perceived to be, that doesn't mean you're going to be good enough at the next level or the level after that, right? There's layers to it.
But it doesn't even feel like he minds that much. Like, he's fully willing to accept that this couple was better than him. That's why he was so willing to give up the prize. It's more so the idea that, like, even if he's not the best, he doesn't want to be told that he is. You know, he realizes that he does actually have to earn this. This is something, unlike every other aspect of his life, this is something he works hard on. And if he is not, like, the deserving of it, he doesn't want to just be given it as like a token prize.
Yeah, because he wants to feel proud of the dancing, and he can't feel proud of it if he's just handed the victory for no good reason. So, yeah, so he basically drags Stephanie outside into the car, and like, again, this is the backseat of this same car that's been used as this type of the hookup spot throughout the movie, and he's got Stephanie there, and they kiss, but very quickly she sort of starts to say no, like, we're not doing this, and he gets really upset and calls her a cock tease, and she's like, don't you call me that, and it gets forceful, and I'm not saying he actually tries to assault her necessarily. That's maybe maybe he is, maybe he isn't. It's kind of hard to say like how far he's going to go here, but she does knee him in the balls and like escapes effectively, because he is being forceful, he is being a bit threatening, he is grabbing her. And it's not a pleasant moment. It really feels like, as much as he's maybe starting to realize certain things by this point in the movie, this is like the lowest he gets as well. Like, it really is this kind of low point in the writing.
It feels like the last bit of pleasure he had in his life, which was the dancing, was taken away from him. So he's going back to the only other thing that's ever given him pleasure, which is sex, and he's just trying to take that as well.
Yeah, and she understandably is like, no, this is not, just because we kissed does not mean that this was an invitation to this. But that effectively is saying, hey, you kissed me, so that was
you belong to me now.
Yeah, you've opened the doors, like, here I am.
You're my girl. Yeah.
So that's not to say this is not to say this is the darkest moment, though, because the darkest moment comes after. I just said it was the darkest moment for him specifically as an active participant, because the next thing that happens is that Annette, who's now at her lowest point, she's been accepting like a speed or something from one of the other guys.
She's been drinking and on speed, so that's just a bad combination already.
And the other guys come to the car. One of them's got her, and Travolta gets out of the car, and he actually tries to stop this briefly, where he kind of tries to take Annette and say, hey, like, I'll take you away, look home somewhere or whatever. He does step in to try and stop her from doing this, but she acts out and says, no, like, I don't belong to you, or whatever she says. And the other guy's like, no, what's your problem? And they actually get into a little bit of a fist fight when he tries to like stop them. So eventually it just kind of like escalates and eventually calms down. But we cut to, in the back of the seat, one of the guys is with her, and Travolta and the other two guys are in the front, and these two are having sex in the back seat, and it's not pleasant to begin with, but it's not. Yeah, like
Annette has going into the car. Annette has basically offered herself up to the entire crew. She's saying like, "Oh yeah, go ahead, do whatever you want. I have zero self-esteem, so I'm all yours." And it's only once the first guy finishes that you see this look of just shock and realization as to what is going on in that space.
I think we have to emphasize here is that the camera's just on her face. And at first, I wouldn't say she looks that happy about what's going on, but she's not in distress. But her face sort of drops, like you say, towards the end of it. And as soon as that's done, she kind of starts to get a little bit weepy and saying, no, like, okay, I don't want any more. But then, like, the guy's like, all right, okay, it's your turn now. And they stop the car, he gets out and swaps places with the other guy, the two that are interchangeable, whose names I can't remember.
Double J and Bob, I think.
It doesn't matter.
Sure, whatever.
Joey.
That was the other one.
And so the other one gets in the back seat, and she's literally pleading and saying no. And the guy even complains, "Oh, I get her when she's crying," but he still does it. So he rapes her. Like, this is just straight up assault. Like, at this point, there's no two ways about this. And the entire time, Tony in the front seat, Travolta is just sitting there looking like
he's just drinking.
Well, he's not even drinking. He's just staring ahead. He's like, he's just mortified. Well, this is the thing. It's a complex moment because on the one hand, it's very easy to still be mad at him because he's still not doing it. Like, she's pleading for help and he's just sitting there listening to it. He's just letting himself be surrounded by this and not doing anything, which maybe indicates that he feels trapped too. But at the same time, he does look like he's not in a happy place. He's certainly affected by what's going on.
Yeah, no, it's definitely weird, especially once it's all wrapped up. They pull over on the side of the bridge, as they tend to do, to just mess around on the cables or whatever. And he turns back in the back seat. She's still crying. She's recovering from what just happened. And he's just like, are you happy now? You finally got what you wanted. Are you happy now? And she's, again, just when you thought she couldn't break anymore. Yeah, she's just completely gone again.
I mean, the line that he follows up that with that really got me was, "Congratulations, you're a slut," only he didn't say slut. Yeah. Right? And she's weeping and she goes off running and he has to go catch her. And again, it's this weird thing where he's kind of doing it like to like stop her from like running off and getting herself killed. But at the same time, it's like, it's hard to like feel like he's doing anything good here. And as they're all faffing about, Bobby, like, starts climbing the cables at the bridge and he's like, look at me, and it's at this point where he starts saying, hey, okay, like, come down. Like, he's starting to feel like the adult in the scene because he's trying to wrangle them in and stop them from doing something bad.
It's also worth noting that Bobby never joined in on like the cable stuff. Like, this is the first time he's done it, and he is definitely not doing it safely like they do it.
So yeah, I mean, everything in this like span of like 5 minutes, from her sort of like willing herself into this situation and then slowly realizing that and wanting to stop, but them not letting her. And then like Joey like getting effectively suicidal here because he feels also trapped. Like, I suppose it's true to say that a lot of the characters that actually get time in this movie feel trapped in some way, in one way or another. And he ultimately falls into the water, and that's kind of, it cuts to the police being there. And
That's the thing about the falling scene, though. I thought it was just going to be, because the way it started to cut, like, he fell off the beam, and then it cut up to Travolta's face, and I was like, okay, the implication's there. But nah, man, they cut back, and they show the body hitting the water. Like, it's a faraway shot, but they show the splash, and I'm like, oh, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. That guy's dead.
Yeah. So it ends with this tragedy, and it's kind of this, like, almost warning to Tony's character, and, like, seeing the people around him and wanting to get away from them, and he doesn't go home. He walks across the bridge, but notably he walks across the Manhattan side of the bridge because this all takes place literally in the middle of the bridge between Brooklyn and Manhattan. And he goes across to Manhattan. He gets on the subway, and by the time he gets there, it's morning. But he gets to Stephanie's place, and he knocks on the door, and he says he's sorry about last night, and he wants to talk to her. And he's like, "Hey," she even flat out says, "Oh, I don't know if I want to let a rapist in." Like, she calls him out for the way he was acting and what he did.
Yeah, he just owns up to it. He's like, all right, I'm just gonna stand here in the corner, so I'm not gonna do anything. Like, I recognize that I did something wrong there. I'm owning up to that.
So he effectively says to her, wants to sit down and start talking properly, that he needs to get away from where he is. He needs to maybe get in Manhattan and start actually looking for something, find a job, maybe do what she did. And she's like, okay, what are you going to do? He's like, well, I can do stuff. I mean, you couldn't do anything when you first came here. He's like, well, I could type. You know, I was a trained typist at least, so there was at least a skill. But he's like, well, I don't know, I'll find something. But the big thing here, not only is he voicing this desire to like, okay, move to the city and maybe look for something that was out of his means before. The big thing here is that he actively says that he wants to see her, but emphasizes, but no, I'm not like trying to. I mean, I think the way he's like, I'm not chasing your pussy or something. Like, he says something really crude. Yeah. So he's still him. Like, he's still saying things the way he would say them. But he says, like, just as a friend. And I think the really bit that feels like he's getting a little bit more mature here is like, so it's like, hey, you sure? Like, do you think you could be just friends with a girl? And he's like, you know what? To be honest, I don't really know, but all I can do is try. And it actually felt like the most mature thing he'd said in the whole movie was that line.
Absolutely. This is definitely the turning point where he's hit rock bottom. A friend of his has died. Like, he recognizes all this bad stuff that's happened over the life. He lost the friendship with her. Obviously they made it back up here, but like, he lost this friendship with someone that he deeply cared about because he just acted out like a kid. And now that he's bouncing back from that, he's like, all right, if I've got to rebuild stuff, I'm going to do it right. So I'm going to try to be more of an adult. I'm going to do this right. Yeah. And again, it's the sort of thing where he knew every fact about the bridge. He knows what he needs to do. He knows all of like how to be an adult and whatnot. He just didn't want to. Well, and now he finally has that means and the motivation to do it.
I think more specifically, the idea that he knows so much about the bridge indicates to me that even if he's not admitting it to himself, or at least certainly not to other people, he does think about crossing it and going and living a life outside of where he is. And that scene, him telling all those stories about the bridge, kind of reveals that the only reason why he's thought so much about this bridge is because it is symbolic to him. It is this literal thing that he'll cross into a different life. And it's just about him like actually getting there. But the ending, while he has improved as a character somewhat, and I do appreciate that it's not like, oh, he's suddenly just this great, perfect person, right?
Yeah.
Like, he is still flawed, but that makes it a bit more interesting and grounded. I think it's not this happy ending though, because there's so much casualty in getting to this point. One friend is dead after feeling trapped and willingly killing himself. Another friend, Annette, if you can even call her that, but this young woman has been through hell and then been raped by the end of this movie, in his presence, no less. Like,
and I would say explicitly because of the way he treated her as well.
Yeah, it's kind of, a lot of it is on him for how he pushed her in a certain way. And I think his hands are not clean, and maybe that is also symbolic of growing up and like, okay, there's things you kind of have to atone for. Naturally as you grow up. I mean, hopefully most people don't have anything quite that dark on their hands, but
yeah, hopefully. The disco scene, man, it was a dark time.
Yeah, 70s New York, hell of a place. But it's just a really, it's a really conflicting ending, and in some ways I like that it's conflicting because it's not this squeaky clean thing. It makes it feel more like a genuine complex drama with a complex character. But at the same time, some of it is just a little bit so dark that he was just there for that rape that it does kind of feel hard to just, be behind who he is now. Like, I don't know, as part of me still feels that you have to have comeuppance in some way for that. But, like, it is what it is.
Well, the comeuppance is a 0% rating on the sequel. So,
Staying Alive was the comeuppance. That's all that movie is. It's 2 hours of just comeuppance.
Yep. Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I think that you leave this movie and it's, as much as you go into the beginning of it, you see him strutting down the street, and I think from an audience perspective, at the beginning of this movie, you want to be in his position. And mind you, only like for the first scene, but you want to have the confidence he has. You want to have like the style he has. You want to be that character.
He walks down the street like he owns the world, and then all we find out after that scene is how small he actually is in the world.
Right, exactly. So then by the end of it, while you have seen that he's grown and whatnot, you as the audience member recognize that, like, that's not something you should desire. That's not a character you should strive to be. It's something, like, maybe once he grows up, yeah, he might be able to be something good, but it's, as he is now, he's just barely figuring out life. It's not something that it should be the goal for however many people who watch this movie.
In many ways, it's about him just getting over the line into, okay, there's hope. And that's it. There's not much more than that. Which is fine, but it definitely leaves me feeling conflicted about the character by the end. So...
Yeah, I mean, if I were to say, I don't know, like listicles and stuff like that, they always come out with like, oh, the top 10 whatever characters.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to see like top 10 coolest characters in cinema or something like that, and this character was somewhere on the list, I don't think I would argue it that much. I think that he is, irrespective, he is a cool character. But if you then turned around and said like, oh, top 10 like best characters in terms of like, how heroic they were or something like that, and this guy was anywhere even close to the list, I would immediately have issues. It's a difference of style over substance, I guess. He's very stylish, but in terms of being a human being, he is messed up.
Yeah. And even being on a cool list, I would argue a little bit, because kind of the point is that it's fake. He's not really cool. He acts cool to begin with, but as the movie goes on, you learn he isn't.
Yeah, I guess it really is just the thing of how far confidence really gets you. How far this, like, if you can just put on the veneer of confidence, even if you don't have it deep down, it's just, you can fool everybody into thinking you have this perfect life.
Yeah, and of course, one of the things he's saying at the end of the dance competition, when he's talking about how they shouldn't have won and this other couple should have won because they're better, one of the things he says, he makes a little speech about how everyone has to talk down to someone. We talk down to the other races talk down to these other races. Like, everyone talks down to someone, everyone shits on someone. Why does it have to be like that? They deserve to win, they should have won. And everything we've said about his relationship with Annette and then Stephanie's relationship with him, all revolves around someone being the one talking down to the other one, and what that does to both of them in terms of their relationship. So it's not like Stephanie comes out of this being a squeaky clean character either. She's clearly guilty of some of the same things, but certainly she's like a notch up. She's been through the experience already with someone else, so she's just she is technically a bit more experienced than Tony is, a little bit more mature, but still guilty of some of the same kind of broad ideas.
Yeah, and honestly, I like how it ends without the romantic inclination. It ends with him saying, like, yeah, no, I want to be friends. I don't think that's being in a relationship clearly is not a good thing, either between us or for me right now, whatever you want to read that as. But they come out of it in that line of mutual respect. The idea that they can both see each other on the same level and they can respect each other in that regard.
The final shot of the movie is the close-up of the handshake, which is the symbol of equal, like, respect, right? That's like symbolism.
I mean, you say handshake, it's not like a business handshake. It's just her hand in his, but yeah.
Sure, I mean, it's just, it's like, there's a reason why they chose that as the final moment.
Yeah, instead of like a passionate kiss or something like that.
Yeah, or even a hug, which is a bit more kind of like mushy and affectionate. This is more about a symbol of equality. And it's something that both of them had to get to that point for in some ways. But yeah. All right, well, I guess we're ready to rate the movie. Saturday Night Fever, David, what you giving it?
Can I just say before I rate this? I've always known the Bee Gees and Saturday Night Fever are like synonymous with each other. But I've always approached it with this more peppy, upbeat, imaginary Saturday Night Fever I've had in my head. So now the next time that I hear like Staying Alive, I'm not going to picture him walking down the street jauntily with the paint bucket. I'm going to picture Bobby falling off the bridge. And it's just always going to stick with me in that way.
I'm going to picture Annette just holding her hand out with a sad look in her face as she's holding condoms in her hand. Like, please, sir.
Look, we can have sex now. Oh, Jesus Christ, Annette. Yeah, no, I mean, in terms of rating this, I definitely think this might be the top of the season. The Frances Ha was very good, but it's also very different. It's almost impossible to compare the two. I mean, obviously there's themes of growing up between both of them.
They're both like growing up character dramas. They both have that broadly in common, but they're very differently made films.
Yeah, but like that's the thing. The coming of age was present throughout more than half of the movies that we did for dancing. So I would say that this is.
Yeah, but I would say this and Frances Ha are the more actual dramas.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, the other ones are a lot more feel-good coming of age, whereas the other two were like, no. Growing up is hard, and we need to examine that. So no, overall, I think this one is super solid. I think I am going to put it at the same level as Francis Ha. I'm going to give this one an 8.5. I can't tell you exactly what's missing from the 9, but it just doesn't quite feel like it gets up to that 9 quality. Maybe it's because I don't really feel the urge to come back to it. I don't think this is something with a lot of rewatch potential to it, and I also think that it might relate a bit better to the generation prior to me, or even the one before that, than it does to me personally. But that's just because I don't know 70s New York.
Yeah, I think it's a really well written movie. It's well constructed. I think the direction, maybe all in the fight scene, is very solid and confident about what it's doing with the characters at any point. And the way it feels like it's almost dreamlike when he's dancing, to sort of emulate the idea that he's, losing whatever he's concerned about the rest of the time. It's all gone when he's dancing, and it's just him on the dance floor. Like, that's all well done. Character drama stuff's really strong. There's solid themes and motifs throughout. So I think for me it's going to be an 8. I'm not going to go any higher than that. I think that's up half a point since from the last time I watched it, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. And
all right,
because it's solid enough that I don't think I can go lower than that. But I also don't think I personally I'm ever going to feel that attached or love it the way that I do some other things. It's just speak to me a bit more. And I think it might just be because he's just, some of the things that he does or says or is involved in is just a step further than I would like to really get behind the character. Like, it's other dramas where I'm a bit more rooting for the character. I don't know if I ever quite root for this character in the same way.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that, but I don't think that that's detrimental to the movie. I think you can have a movie that is able to present a character flaws, no matter how big of flaws they are, and just show how they change. Yes, they are technically the protagonist, but that doesn't mean they have to be someone you root for. You just see their evolution. Yeah,
obviously there's other darker character dramas that you definitely don't root for the character, but they speak to me more at some level because of what they're exploring.
The relation level, that's what I was saying, yeah.
There's just a slight, I don't know, just a slight disconnect from me truly loving it, but I can't not respect it as a solidly made movie with good performances and a good script. So,
yeah,
there you go.
So I think it pretty clearly between the two of us makes the cut. I don't think there's any question there.
I don't think it's any higher than that, but I think it makes the cut.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say, like I said, though, if you only can pick one movie out of all of dance season to watch, which that seems like a weird restriction, but okay, I would say probably Saturday Night Fever be the quintessential one. It's in terms of quality and also just what it did for dance in general.
I mean, I'd say Francis has a better movie. I'd recommend that more, but
it just seems like less of a dance movie, as much as it is in the season.
I don't care. Yeah. I don't care. I'm not recommending the best dance movie. I'm just recommending the best movie out of the season.
I got you.
So yeah, that wraps up a season. Next time, which will be after a week off. There's a week off before the next season starts. That's just a normal thing now. To give us a chance to actually, get ahead in the recording.
Please let me sleep.
Next season, of course, we're returning to disaster movies, but this time it is 90s disaster movies. We're doing that, of course, because there's a sequel to Twister coming out. So we're going to build up to Twister and then do Twisters right after that. So it's 90s disaster with a sequel tacked on that's brand new. So fun little idea, something a little bit different, definitely different from dance movies. So look forward to that.
Now, Pete, before we do all the end stuff, was it really that bad? Was dance season really all that bad now that we're at the end of it? Like, you finally, I mean, you said you watched a few of these before, but Saturday Night Fever was not bad. Francis Ha was genuinely good in your eyes. Can you say that the season was a total bust?
Francis Ha could have been on Criterion. I didn't need dance season for that. I just think it was a waste of a season. We could have done something more interesting.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough.
I'm not saying it was completely torture, but there was much more interesting things we could have been doing.
Look, Pete, I know for a fact that because of the blackmail you have on me, I'm never going to be allowed to leave this show. So it's not like we're going to be cut for time at any given point.
Don't you worry. I've got so many seasons in mind. that
Yep.
you get no say in. They're just going to happen. And I'm going to laugh.
See, here's the thing, though. I know that you're never going to pick something so bad that I'll actually super hate it.
Well,
Like, we have extra reels, but I don't think I'm ever going to get to the point, unless like you go with an entire season of like German experimental art house films, then I might have some questions. But
I mean, we could go arty for a season that might torture you. I feel like it's more of the franchises that'll make you do an Ace, because Ace being the sci-fi podcast, we have to do even the bad ones, like even if we know they're bad. You lucked out in not having to do the Transformers movies, but hey, Star Wars prequels, we've done one of those already. There'll be more of those to come.
you forget the next time we like have a major Transformers movie, I'm gonna have homework to get ready for that. So
Yeah, but you're very lucky because I decided not to bother for the animated one that's coming out.
true. So as long as Marky Mark doesn't come back and reprise his role.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hey, there's a crossover G.I. Joe Transformers movie apparently in the works.
Oh, that's right.
So we'll have to do the G.I. Joe movies, and you'll have to catch up on the Transformers movies.
Oh no. I think I'm gonna be sick that day.
Oh, goody. Anyway, guys, yeah, I said at the start, we do some bonus shows on Patreon. One's the Criterion Cut, which I just mentioned. We do movies from the Criterion Collection. All patrons get access to that. All YouTube members get access to that if you sign up that way. And then the $5 tier and up, or the $7 tier and up on YouTube memberships. Since I never mentioned that. I always promote Patreon first because there's more tiers to that and there's more options. But if you only want the bonus content and you'd rather pay through Google, that is an option. You can do it that way. But
yes.
Yeah, Extra Reels is the show where we watch some of the worst things ever made. Hopefully so bad they're amazing. Sometimes they are, and a lot of the times they aren't. But that's where we truly torture one another. And yeah, if that sounds like fun, you can come and enjoy that. So that's where you'll get your Neil Breens, and I'm assuming one day we'll do The Room, but I haven't done that one yet. But that's
got to be like episode like 50 or something of Extra Reels. It's got to be a big number.
Yeah, episode 100 of Extra Reels, and however many years that would be.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for joining us, everyone. Check out Patreon if you want to support all the content. And you can, of course, like, subscribe, all the usual things on YouTube. All helps out a bunch too. So thank you very much for joining. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies. And if you can get it, it's always nice to have a diplomatic immunity.